Thank you, Pramodya. And thank you, Mr. Hans, for taking the time to be part of this session on sexual and gender based violence. So, we have a few questions prepared for you about this topic. And without further ado, we can get right into them. Um, so, people often find it really challenging, really difficult to talk about sexual and gender based violence. What do you think are the main reasons why people find it so challenging?
Um,
Well, the easy answer to that is how we treat our survivors of violence. So, if you take a look at how we treat our survivors of violence, how we treat people who come forward to talk about what has happened to them, there's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of re-victimization. So, for example, one of the things that we had to do with the Sri Lanka Police, the Women and Children's Bureau, is work with them in fostering a non-judgmental attitude when someone comes to them, for example, talking about how their consent has been violated or how their nudes are being used to threaten them or extort money from them, etc. Most often, the conversations boil down to, oh, why did you do this in the first place? Or if you didn't do this, nothing would have happened. That kind of attitude. Now, if that is the attitude within the Women and Children's Bureau of the Sri Lanka Police, that sort of asking for it. Ilankana Sanskrutiya නැතියෙන්නේ අපිට asking for it. The girls somehow ask for it. So even if you take sexual violence, if you take incidents around rape, now I'll give you an example. A 20-year-old came to me at the time. At the time, I was a rape counselor. She came to me, and what had happened was basically this. So she had gone to a nightclub, and then they had gone to house parties, and she had consumed a lot of alcohol. And after this consumption of alcohol, she had felt sick. She wanted to vomit, which she did at this house. And then when she came out of the bathroom, there was a bed there. She passed out on the bed, and then she woke up being raped. Now, this happened in Colombo. Now, that incident really highlights my point in the way that it was everyone blamed her. So, why did she drink alcohol? Why did she go to the bathroom alone? Why did she pass out on that bed? Why did she wear a short skirt, thereby making it easy for the rapist to rape her? Now, those are not the questions we need to ask. The question, the central question is, why did the rapist or this boy or this man feel he is entitled to climb on top of this girl who is passed out? Now, that is the central question. So, while we have this culture of asking for it, where we engage in victim blaming up and down the ladder, families do it, peers do it, school authorities definitely do it. So, when we blame the victim all the time and say it's your fault, then to articulate or come forward and say, listen, this has happened to me is difficult. So, that needs to change. Our attitudes around it, how we view it, that needs to change.
Yes, sir. I definitely agree on the whole victim blaming thing, especially in Sri Lanka. They always try to blame the victim and find some sort of reasoning to blame the person for whatever that happened. Um, just like that in Sri Lanka, we also have a lot of myths around sexual and gender based violence. Uh, a lot of the time, we hear that only girls or only adult girls, adult women are victims of gender based violence. What other misconceptions and myths are around this topic?
Well, I think simply if you take a look at the National Child Protection Authority, if you take a look at their statistics, now I'd encourage everyone here, if you have a computer or you have access to a computer or a device, go to childprotection.gov.in childprotection.lk, something like that. Okay, childprotection.gov.lk. And you will find the Child Protection Authority. Then you go to statistics and they'll tell you. So obviously, there are child victims or survivors of child sexual abuse and also child abuse. Um, so it is not just adults, absolutely not. Um, the other one is that, of course, there are men and boys who are also survivors of sexual violence. Of course, there are. Now, you will find it difficult to find statistics on men and boys. There will be some statistics within the National Child Protection Authority, but in general, finding those statistics are different. So even if you take a look at the grave crimes abstract of the Sri Lanka police, so if you go to police.lk, and again, if you click on statistics there, you'll get the grave crimes abstract. And in that also, you can get some statistics around the violence that men face. Now, if you think it is different or difficult rather for a woman to come forward and say that I have been raped, think of also how difficult it is for a man and a boy in this patriarchal construct of a culture that we have to come and say that he has been sexually violated, right? Because he should be the sexual violator, not the sexually violated. I mean, that is what is put into these heads, right? So it is that attitudes are built how? I mean, where do attitudes come from? These attitudes come from us, our surroundings. Most often, sexism, fascism, racism, those are things that you learn at home. Those are things that you learn from your peer group. Those are things that you learn in your school. So we really have to pay attention to these myths, not just in terms of who is a victim or who bears the brunt of this, but also the myths around the perpetrator. That the person who raped the girl who was asleep with a short skirt on, why did he rape her? Because apparently he has no self-control. That girl was somehow, as I said, asking for it, and therefore it was like his duty that he had to do it. So this sense of entitlement is also deeply problematic. The sense of entitlement that we give young men, especially in this country, young men, we give them a real sense of entitlement around the objectification of the woman. I'll put it like that. Now we are about to enter into a big match season, correct? Uh, the vile, horrible, degrading, dehumanizing language that is used to put down women during the big match. I mean, take a look at all those sort of misogynistic songs, the Baila songs, for example, that completely devalue a woman. Um, just take a look at those attitudes that we build when we say, why do young male students jump into schools of female students? I mean, why does that happen? What is the reason? What is the justification? A few years ago, the students of St. Peter's College actually went to the extent of breaking down the gate at Holy Family Convent in order to get in. And there was violence. Now, what kind of entitlement do you have, or are you given rather, are you encouraged to have by walking into these girls' schools and doing what? Looking at the girls, checking them out. What? To see who the pretty girls are and who aren't. I mean, what? What is that? What is that attitude? What is that approach? So these are things that are perceived to be, oh, these are things that, boys do. That this is the way boys are, that it's part of our culture. No, it is not part of our culture. It is part of our culture in terms of that it devalues and dehumanizes another human being. And in this case, the woman, the objectification of the woman. And boys are told that that is all right. Now, I'll give you one more quick example before we move on. A friend of mine was doing research with regards to violence, sexual violence on public transport. And as part of this conversation on sexual violence, she sat down with a group of young men who happen to also be gay. So their sexual orientation is homosexual. So they are sexually attracted to other men. Now, during the course of this discussion, we were thinking of having a conversation around, okay, victimization. What kind of how are you victimized on public transport as a young man? Are you victimized? But the conversation turned to the fact that they are perpetrators of sexual violence towards women, towards women. And when we were asked, why are you, I mean, you're not sexually attracted to women, why are you perpetrating sexual violence? Why are you perpetrating the sexual violence? It's like, because that is what boys are expected to do. Now, every perpetrator of violence that I have spoken to in terms of public transport, who get up and then pinch, fondle, rub themselves up against women on public transport, their excuse is that the girls like it or the women like it. So these ideas are planted very young in the minds of our children. Now I'll give you another example. One that I often give is, I ask men and I ask boys, hands up if you have never used the word badua or kalla or its equivalent in Tamil or English. If you have never used those words to describe a woman, put your hand up. Now, I was at a Lama Samaj, a children's group down in Beruvala, doing a workshop on respect, and that's a standard question I ask. So there were about 20 kids aged 10 to 14, and just one kid put his hand up and said, Sir, mokadda man danne, what is that? I don't know. And before I could respond to what Badu and Kayala meant, the others responded and said, Eka dannat doy, wadanne noy, tamse pirimiyek doy kela ahua. You know, are you even a man? You don't know what Badu and Kayala mean. So now this was kids as young as 10 and 14. So they're picking this up. We don't have to say they, we pick up this language from our peers, from those who are older, those who are around us. And we think that that is okay. And all this feeds into the misogyny and the victim blaming and the general sort of inequality with women are treated in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, sir. Um, so we know that sexual and gender-based violence have sort of like a ripple effect. It affects an individual and then their families and their communities. Um, why does this happen, and how does this ripple effect happen? And is there any way we can protect individuals from this effect?
See, if someone you love or someone you are connected to has been violated, it is going to affect you. That's just a fact. Um, so now at Grassrooted, when we work with survivors of violence, we also work with their families, their parents if required, their partners if required, their children if required. Working with that family unit is an integral part of our approach, because it is not only that singular person who has experienced that violence or that violation. At the end of the day, the family, especially the family, is often very closely bound with it, especially with children who are often witnesses to domestic violence. Um, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to help children whose mothers or fathers are survivors of domestic violence, because of the trauma that the children undergo when they view that, right? So any decent program that responds to SGBV in Sri Lanka would definitely include a family approach, a family-based approach. Also, in certain contexts, if there are close friends involved, having conversations there, or helping the survivor of the violence to have those conversations, share when he or she is ready to share. That's also very important. So to help families and friends also not push the person who has gone through it to relive it constantly. That is also very important. So it's very important to have conversations constantly with the support network of the person who has gone through the experience. It is integral to any good approach. So that that just needs to be done, and that way you can in some way mitigate what you call the ripple effect or the knock-on effect, in terms of how it affects the people around the victim or the survivor.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So in Sri Lanka, like even intimacy is something that is very strict and it's penalized. And this is usually because of like cultural norms and expectations, right? But do you think these cultural norms and expectations also affect how we view and how we feel about sexual and gender-based violence?
Yeah, yes, it does. It does definitely affect how we view it. Because again, the point is that if you behaved as per our cultures and our norms and our mores, then you would not even be in a relationship until it is time for you to get married, right? So, I mean, that's one end of what culture and norms and mores sort of prescribe in Sri Lanka. Um, so, so yeah, so that again, now it's so important to just take a look at what that means, though. So, just if you take a look at the norms of the girl, for example, let's take a look at where it begins. Like even if you take a look at grassroots, does a lot of work around menstruation period poverty in the Ibagamo area where we live. Now, if you take a look at even basic menstrual products, menstrual hygiene products. Now, you might think that we are in 2024 and therefore menstrual hygiene by now is a norm. It isn't a norm. And the reason that it isn't a norm sometimes is because there is embarrassment or shame associated so closely with menstruation that even going and buying that sanitary napkin from the shop is still a challenge for some people. That's just a reality that we encounter here. Now, that reality is tied to also cost factors. Because of the taxation of menstrual hygiene products, for example, some people cannot afford to buy. Now, they therefore go back to practices like using reusable cloth napkins, which is good, which is a good eco-friendly practice. There's nothing wrong with that. However, then we have to take a look into how you dry that, how you wash that, how you dry that, and it needs to be sun dried. But then again, because of the embarrassment and the shame around a very basic biological function, some women tend to try and dry it in the cupboard or dry it under the mattress, which means that it doesn't dry properly, which then can lead to bacteria buildup, which then can lead to reproductive tract infections, right? So you have all this knock-on effect because of these norms and mores that were sort of putting around this protectionism that we have of women and girls, uh, which is part of our patriarchal construct to make sure that we have someone to produce children. This protectionism leads to opportunities that sometimes young women have to forego because of these restrictions. So we have to address, like how we address menstruation here is just through basic biology, just through basic science, and we have those conversations. So even with SGBV, you have all these layers of perception that are at work, that when someone then is violated or is subject to sexual violence, immediately we say, okay, you did not follow the norms and mores that are laid out by society, and that is why this has happened to you. Someone will find something. Yeah. So you're the generation that needs to change it. I'm hoping. I'm hoping.
Absolutely. We definitely hope to have more of a conversation about topics like this and educate ourselves, especially in sessions like this, of course. Um, and again, about culture, culture also tend to have like a big impact on gender roles and equality and all that. So in Sri Lanka, especially, we have like a very outdated view on equality and power dynamics. So how does power dynamics and gender roles contribute to sexual and gender-based violence?
I'll go back to how men view women. So how did those children in that Lama Samaja view women already, right? So if you are by the age of between 10 and 14, you are already viewing girls as Badua and Kerala. That tells you where we are. Um, it it tells you where we are in terms of how, for example, let's take my family. Let's not go anywhere. Let's take my family. My family, a relatively middle class family, growing up in the 80s, at a time when chicken was bought from a shop as a chicken, like a whole chicken, right? So you didn't have legs and thighs, and you had to buy a chicken those days, right? And then the chicken was cut and given, right? It was only a few years ago that my sisters were sitting with me and they told me, do you know that we never got to eat the leg or the thigh when we were growing up? And I said, what do you mean? And they were like, no. The boys, there were two boys, the boys were given the legs and the thighs, and we had to eat wing pieces. So growing up, my sisters in my home ate only exclusively wing pieces of chicken, and it was the boys who were always served the legs and the thighs. Right now, unfortunately, you think, okay, this is a story from the 80s, Hans. No, it still happens today. It still happens. I don't know about in your own homes, but it definitely happens around where we are here in Ibagam. And I know of enough instances where it happens in Kandy, where it happens in Colombo, because when I have this conversation, there are girls and boys who admit that, yes, this is still a practice where the boys are considered requiring more. Now, I always give this thought experiment in terms of if you keep the girl at home, sorry, if you keep the boy at home rather, like we keep the girls at home, we keep the boy at home and we give him the Chattumutti set or the tea set, and we give him his dolls, and we give him his, we give him his fairy tale books in which always there is a white prince to come and save you. We culturally prepare the boy in that way, and we give the girl, for example, we give the girl the bike and the bat and the football, and we tell her to go to the pitanya and play and climb trees and get tired. And then you take that boy who comes from the room after playing with dolls and reading fairy tales, and you take the girl who has been playing outside, and you will find that the girl is actually the one that eats more, not the boy, because it's input of energy and output of energy, right? So again, we have to shift our view. So our view of gender is skewed. Our view of gender is absolutely skewed. We have to shift it and have a conversation more around the human being and what the human being requires than saying the boy needs more food and the girl doesn't. Also, in terms of simple things like brain development, a lot of people think that brain development is in somehow gendered. It is not gendered. Brain development is dependent on what the input to the brain is. So it's very important that these myths and misconceptions that go into forming our norms and mores are challenged, and challenged with sort of current science, so that you don't have to have arguments. You're just stating a series of facts, which then people can go and independently verify.
I absolutely have seen the whole the boy child gets more food than the girl child. I have friends who were twins, and she was always complaining about this. She was always hungry because her brother used to get more food. So again, like also there are different types of sexual and gender-based violence. Can you like clarify and elaborate on that, please?
There are types. I mean, there's verbal, there's physical, there's sexual. Um, but listen, violence is when you feel violated, right? Violence is when you feel violated. So what makes you feel uncomfortable? What makes you feel violated? It's very important. It's very important to understand, for us to have a understanding of what constitutes sexual violence or gender-based violence. We have to understand deeply things like consent. And unfortunately, we are not very good at understanding consent in Sri Lanka. A case in point again is the grave crimes abstract of the Sri Lanka police. Now, in this grave crimes abstract, you have rape, disaggregated data around rape, rape of a woman over 16, and then rape of a woman under 16, which is called statutory rape, because 16 in Sri Lanka is the age in which a person can grant sexual consent. or consent to have sex. Now, in the police data gathering, you will see statutory rape without consent and statutory rape with consent. Now, I can guarantee you that we are the only police force in the history of the world to have a statement that says rape with consent. No other police force will have it, right? Now, why is it statutory rape with consent? Because what they're implying is that the girl and the boy have gone away of their own volition, of their own accord. They have eloped or panela gihilla or that. So it is to sort of understand that effect. Within the law, it's called the Romeo and Juliet clause. So even if the girl is 15, if the boy is say 17 or 18, there is something called the Romeo and Juliet clause that is applied, so that in terms of sentencing the boy, it is more lax. So that's another matter. So what I'm trying to say is our understanding around consent, going back to the bus. No, the girls like it, sir. They like it. They enjoy it. Now, I was at a mixed school where one boy was saying this, like they like it, they enjoy it. If they don't like it, then they should get off the bus. And then a girl on the other side got up and said, if I have to get off the bus every time someone comes and sexually violates me, then I have to get off at every single bus stand, and then it's going to take me a very long time to go home. Right? So again, these ideas are what we need to relook at and revalue. And the best way to revalue and look at these ideas again is to take a look at, okay, what is the existing science around all this? What have we learned in terms of what is the evidence base that is there? What are people learning when they come up with, when they take a look at these situations and see, okay, why are there these different types of violence? Right? I mean, think about the violence of a socio-economic violence. Think about, let's say, the person who earns the money not giving the other person enough money to do whatever she or he needs to do. Let's say a woman is the breadwinner. She does not give her male partner requisite funds for the running of the house, and uses the fact that she is the breadwinner to create a very toxic, violent, emotionally traumatic situation for her partner. That is also violence, right? So it is not just the hitting or the spitting at or the kicking or the raping or the sexual abuse. It is all these, also these psychological forms of gaslighting, for example. Anything that makes that other person feel less, anything that makes that other person question their worth and degrades their self esteem. All these are different forms of violence, and we don't pay attention enough to the more subtle forms of violence. Because it is those more subtle forms of violence that finally lead sometimes to the larger forms of violence, like physical violence. But I can also tell you that we have handled enough deaths in my time, enough suicides in my time, that never had the manifestation of physical violence but was a result of emotional and psychological trauma.
Yeah, people don't really think about that aspect of violence. They only think about like the physical aspect, but that emotional violence can really have a long-term effect, especially when it comes to suicide cases. And yeah, so in Sri Lanka, we do have like the penal code and criminal procedures that act as the legal framework. But what other legal frameworks are in place in Sri Lanka that help us to address and prevent sexual and gender-based violence?
Okay, so for this, I would like you all to go to our website, bakamono.lk. If you go to bakamono.lk and you click on the Learn tab, there'll be violence prevention under that Learn tab. And if you click on violence prevention, you will get a lot of information, including legal framework around rape, legal framework around incest, child sexual abuse, domestic violence, cyber exploitation, sexual harassment, all the different forms of sexual violence or sexual and gender-based violence in Sri Lanka. If you go to our website, you will get a very keen overview of all the different forms. Now, the area I'd like to talk about a little bit is we have the laws in place actually. And when you go to that Learn tab on bakamuno.lk and you click on violence prevention, you will see we have extensive laws in place. It is not the legal framework that we need to be too concerned about. In my opinion, we don't even require this new draconian law that we have now in terms of the online safety bill. I mean, we actually do have decent laws in place to deal with situations. The problem here is implementation. Now, on average, it apparently takes between 18 to 14 years for a rape case to reach its conclusion. Now, think of that wait period, 8 to 14 years. Sometimes when the survivor of the incident is a child or a minor, by the time the rape case reaches its conclusion, he or she would be an adult, would be a father, would be a mother. And as a result of that, this length of period, as a result of the length of period for this, a lot of people then refuse to continue. They drop out and they say, no, we don't want to prosecute anymore. I'm getting on with my life. I'm a father now. I'm a mother now. I'm leaving the country. They don't want to prosecute. So then justice delayed is in fact in those instances justice denied. Then we have certain laws that we really need to look at very closely, again, very gendered laws. The first one that comes to mind is the marital rape law. Now, our marital rape law is absolutely nonsensical because unless the husband and wife are legally separated at the time, marital rape does not come into play. Now, that is a ridiculous law which gives almost sanctions marital rape in a sense. It almost sanctions marital rape because a husband cannot be prosecuted for raping his wife. And I can tell you that marital rape is a reality. It is a definite reality where we work here in Ibaka. And it's a definite reality in places like Colombo too. So these laws we need to take a look at. And of course, then we need also to take a look at Section 365 and 365A, laws that criminalize adults who love each other and happen to be of the same sex. Now, there is a private member bill brought by a Pohottu MP called Dolavatta, which is moving through Parliament at the moment, to amend these laws so that consenting adults who happen to be same-sex couples will not be prosecuted because they love each other, right? So there are a few laws that we definitely need to review and look at and amend, yes. But what we have, as you will see when you go through, is not the lack of a legal framework, it is the lack of will to complete or process or go through these in a more timely manner, which will bring justice to the survivor. Now, that is what we need to work on. And that work, unfortunately, is slow and arduous, despite much advocacy that has been done in this space over the years. That is still slow and arduous. And the system we have is unfortunately still the system we have.
Thank you, sir. Um, what can we do to ensure that human rights of the survivors are protected, and what resources are available for survivors in our community?
Yeah. Now, again, our system is our system. So the best way to expedite is to immediately identify legal support. which means that even before you go to the police station to make your complaint, identify a lawyer, make sure you take a lawyer with you so that he or she, the lawyer, is with you, whereby when your complaint is taken down, they are in a position to advise under what provision, legal provision that should be done. Because a lot of the time, what the police do is they try to send the person who has come forward to make the complaint, send that person home and say, no, it can't be that bad, go back, try again. That sort of arasamadana karana again, right? So go with a lawyer. So any of our clients who come to us, whether it is an online case or if it is a case of domestic violence, whatever form of violence it is, we do not send that person, even in the first instance, to the police without a lawyer. Now, that we find is the most sensible approach given our current system, and then that lawyer is with that person through that process. Now, in order to get that kind of support, there are services available. You have government services available. You have services available like us, the Grassroots Trust. You have organizations like Women in Need who also provide those legal services, and a few other organizations, Child Protection. The National Child Protection Authority also has legal support. So you have entities that are set up specifically to support victims and survivors of sexual violence. But if you don't know how to get at them, if you email us or if you go to bakamono.lk or you email us, we will get you the support you need in the place where you are.
Thank you, sir. How can we educate and strengthen the support systems within our community so that we can assist survivors in a better way and give them the care that they need?
I think the most important thing that a team of young people like you can do is raise awareness. You need to raise awareness. You need to have conversations. You need to break the silence around this issue because talking about sexual violence, as we said at the start, can be a taboo subject. It can be something that people are afraid of articulating. So I think one of the most helpful things that a team of young people like you can do is raise awareness, begin conversations. Now, at the end of this session, I'll be sending out a volunteer form to anyone of you who would like to sort of come on board with Bakamuno, make some memes, write some articles, use creative mediums to communicate because we need to communicate in creative mediums. Um, and you need to communicate to your peers. It is very important that you communicate with your peers because, like I said a little earlier, you are this generation uh, that is giving us a lot of hope in terms of how you approach this. You are a generation with unprecedented access to information, right? However, unfortunately, you are also the generation of algorithms. So you can be an echo chamber, right? So Trump supporters, for example, will always want to kill the Democrats because of the information that they have access to. So we need to watch that. We need to be sensible. We need to be objective. We need to know that we are in echo chambers when we are on Facebook and when we are on Instagram, etc. Those are echo chambers because algorithms are feeding us the information we want to see. So that's okay if we understand it. And then we have to see, okay, how do we move beyond that algorithm? And when I say algorithm, the algorithm is not limited to the online space. Remember that for the first time, human behavior and attitude is measurable because of algorithms, right? For the first time. So, for example, Facebook has conducted research on how Facebook, after a certain threshold of your interaction with Facebook, on your likes and your hearts and all the rest of it, is in a better position than even your spouse to predict your next move because Facebook knows your algorithm, right? So this is not something to be feared. This is something to be understood. Now, if we understand this, then it is our responsibility as young people to raise our voice and, like you are doing here, I mean, what you are doing right now, in terms of having these conversations, having people like us on to sort of, okay, let's see what is out there, let's see what is happening. That's a vital part of this. So I would really encourage you, if you really want to improve the support system for survivors in your capacity, direct survivors to the support system. Okay, and directing survivors to the support system is talking about violence and talking about who is there to help. So if you want an avenue to do that, we are welcoming volunteers at this moment.
Thank you, sir. So earlier we talked about legal frameworks and how those might protect us well in case if they are implemented, of course. Other than these legal frameworks, what other preventive measures can be taken to
Um,
reduce sexual and gender based violence?
I think one area, if we take a look at the legal frameworks, other than that, again, what we can do, I will have to repeat myself for the previous answer. You know what I mean? We need to break the silence. Right now, think of think of a chakra, right? So right at the top is this silence. And from silence, you can draw an arrow to ignorance. Okay, because we don't talk about it, we generally don't know much about it, what to do, where to go, how to find help. And ignorance, you can draw an arrow to fear. And because when we don't know, we are scared. We are scared. And when we are scared, then we other. Then we stigmatize, we discriminate. You know what I mean? We put other people down. We're scared. So we don't know. We laugh at. So when we are looking to sort of revalue our values, when we are looking to sort of try and effect an attitudinal shift, the most important thing is to break silence. Because when we break silence and we start talking more and more, then slowly ignorance around this dissipates. And when ignorance dissipates, so does our fear. And then we have a more healthy, vibrant conversation about what is needed, where we find solutions rather than resort to stereotyping and victim blaming.
Thank you, sir. Um, Sexual and gender based violence survivors tend to often feel oppressed or discriminated based on their sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression, their age, their race, and disabilities. How are these factors connected to each other?
Unfortunately, very closely connected. Now, IFC, the International Financial Corporation, did a study of, I think, 9 or 10 Sri Lankan companies in 2022. And they found that the the most frequent target of work-based sexual harassment was women with disabilities. The women with disabilities were the key target, and then everyone else followed, including people of non-heteronormative sexual orientations, gender identities, gender expression, and sex characteristics. So people who are different. We don't like people who are different. We like everybody to be the same as us. Um, Tribal. We're very tribal. Um, and that tribalism again is encouraged. It's encouraged in our homes. It's definitely encouraged by our schools. So if we are looking at how we are going to look at racism and ableism and homophobia, again, for us, of course, it's all in our education system. Social emotional learning, those basic concepts of respecting the other, valuing the other, understanding where the other comes from. I mean, these are basic social emotional learning skills that unfortunately our schools are not investing in. And that is what our school needs to invest in. Our school system needs to invest in. Because when we start valuing people for who they are, then all these differences that should be celebrated will not be used to divide. So why are we not celebrating the differences instead of deriding people who are different? So that is the question we have. So then again, what are the conversations we're having around respect? What are the conversations we're having around empathy? What are the conversations that we're having around things like consent? What are those conversations that we're having? And until we have those very basic conversations, what does trust mean? For example, I mean, perpetrators of sexual violence often use love and trust to perpetrate violence. So, for example, especially in terms of, let's say, the sharing of nudes, and most often it's male perpetrators who do this to female perpetrators, you're not sharing that picture or you're not making that video with me because you don't love me, because you don't trust me, right? Or you're not sharing your password with me because there is no trust in this relationship. Your password should not be a symbol of fidelity and trust. Your password is there for your privacy. A lot of the cases we get, for example, could have been prevented if they did not look upon the password or did not look upon creating a nude image or the video as this symbol of fidelity and trust. Because as soon as it becomes that and not, let's say, part of your sexual expression, it's problematic. Now, no one, I am not in the least saying do not have a vibrant sexual expression if you choose to do that in terms of sharing, exchanging nudes. I am not here to tell you not to do that. I am just saying be aware of what the consequences of that can be, especially with people who say, oh, you don't love me or you don't trust me if you don't send this. For us, if someone comes to you and says, you don't love me, you don't trust me if you're not sending this or not making this video or not doing XYZ, then that is the very first red flag that you have to pay attention to in terms of what this relationship can potentially become. So, any kind of coercing, any kind of failure to understand and accept consent, because accepting consent is accepting the yes and also accepting the no. So, any kind of failure to accept consent should be a huge red flag in any relationship, uh, and be an indicator of behavior to come. So these concepts, trust, consent, respect, they need unpacking. Empathy, they need unpacking. And we need to have these conversations in all three languages.
Thank you, sir. So we have been talking about how certain relationships can be toxic and how that can lead to sexual and gender-based violence. But what are some characteristics that would define a healthy and respectful relationship? And how can we promote positive gender roles to prevent sexual and gender-based violence?
So top three things in a relationship for us is communication, communication, and more communication. Um, you got to have a chat. You got to talk. You got to be able to express how you feel. Um, you got to be able to talk through even things that you don't agree with. Um, Otherwise, how? How is that going to, in any way, in the end, help you and your overall general well being? Because it's about well being, it's about how you feel. Mindfulness is that. Mindfulness is about your general well being and the well being of others. Being polite, being kind. I mean, kindness is so underrated. Kindness is so um, interchangeable with weakness in our culture that people have forgotten the value of what it means to be kind, and 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 what kindness can do in a relationship. It is kind to sit and listen to your partner. That is kind. It's sometimes a simple thing like a kindergarten exercise is what I tell couples who come to me sometimes. And that kindergarten exercise is think before you speak. Okay? And the think is like this: THINK. So before you speak, think. T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, does it inspire? N, is it necessary to say this right now? And then K is it kind to say this? So if you reflect, and again, that's mindfulness, it's a mindfulness technique. If you reflect on your language, on your attitudes, reflect. Before I say this, think about it. Think about the truth in what you're about to say, the honesty in the helpfulness of what you're about to say. Is it going to inspire this other person? Because if we are saying things and communicating with each other where we're always putting the other person down, that's another huge red flag. If you are with a person who makes you feel less about yourself, if you feel less when you are with that person, then that is something for you to reflect on and change. That is something for you to communicate about. I'm not saying you need to leave that person, but you definitely need to communicate with that person that this kind of attitude, this kind of behavior, this kind of language is affecting me. So it is an essential part of a healthy relationship to communicate. And if you are struggling to communicate with that person, then perhaps reflect on the need for continuing that relationship.
Thank you, sir. So that is it for all the questions we have prepared for you. But there is also a few questions that people have entered through the forum. Um, our first question was, why do even people think about assaulting person, another person?
Well, how have we normalized violence is the question. Why do we think it is okay to hit another person? That's where did we learn that? Because a lot of us, or most of us, it's learned behavior and modeling behavior that have brought us to where we are right now. Okay, from the time we were kids. Kids learn through observation. You're observing, you're listening, you're learning. You have learned from your parents, or you have learned from your guardians, you have learned from the adults that are around you. You have learned from your peers, you have learned from those who are older than you. You have learned. So you've watched, you've observed, you've tried stuff out. Some things have stuck, some things you have changed. You're learning, you're probing. So why do we think it's okay to assault someone? Because we've learned that it is okay to assault someone. Because we have observed that it is okay to assault someone. Because we find that when we assault someone, then there is perhaps no particular consequence that has been attached to that behavior. So when you learn things like that, then you think it is okay. And then that is the kind of behavior that, again, what do we need? Mindfulness, we need reflection, so that we then try and unlearn these harmful behaviors and practices.
Thank you, sir. Another person has said, I have a past of being sexually assaulted by men as a kid. I'm not talking about one time occasions, but where I had to expect it every morning or every night by them. This ended after a while, but I have built this need for gentleness. I'm in a relationship now, but I feel like this need for constant gentleness is bothering me. Because even when my partner plays around with me, accidentally becomes tough in playful nature, I still tend to get triggered by it.
Right. Um, what I would like is if this person can email me, trust@grassrooted.net, and I'll begin a conversation because it's a very specific case. So I'll begin a conversation with that person directly if that's okay. So if you're listening, just email me at trust, at grassrooted.net. Uh, if that's okay, I can perhaps, if you can share that, if you can share my email at the end of it with all the participants, then this very specific case I can handle in that way. Okay.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you very much. And another person have said, I know a person who has got raped by three boys in a particular university, but she's scared to raise her voice about it, or to talk, or to tell about it to any elderly person and to take action. What can I do to help her?
What you can do is encourage her to email me again at trustedgrassrooted.net, and we will talk her through her options based on her case, because it will depend on when it has happened, how it happened. So again, specifically, I can respond to this. If you can get her to email us and we can have a conversation. And again, we have a legal team that can support her, and anyone else who requires support for an incident like this, we are there to help. Get in touch and we will.
Thank you very much, sir. Um, Another person have said, I don't think people talk enough about the absolute disgust and guilt that consumes an adult who has been sexually abused in their past, even as a kid. Even if sexual well being is a need and it's an essential factor for good health, our brains are wired to think that it's bad. And it's difficult to function in a normal relationship because everything feels wrong. Is there any advice you could give this person, Mr. Hans?
Um, I think you're right. I don't think we acknowledge enough what has happened to us, and accepting and acknowledging and accepting what has happened to us is part of the recovery that we need to have in terms of any kind of forward momentum. So to this person also, um, there is help out there. If you want to have conversations about how you can take certain very concrete steps, there are mental health professionals that I can connect you with. See, accessing, when I say mental health professionals, accessing mental health support, talking to someone, learning from someone, learning coping mechanisms from someone, these are all positive steps you can take in making sure that you have general well-being and that your relationship is generally a positive one. So there are steps that can be taken. So I would really encourage uh, this person and whoever else is feeling this or mirroring these feelings to come forward, and we will do our best to identify people who can help you. I mean, these are good people, people who maintain confidentiality, people who know what they're doing. Uh, Not anyone with any Mickey Mouse degree from a tuition class. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Another person had said, you can't really seem to wipe away the feeling of once having the hands over your body. My skin holds memories than I thought it would. I remember exactly how that monster's touch felt against my skin. Now I keep craving and finding comfort in the exact opposite of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can completely understand this sentiment. Uh, and again, as part of your recovery, there are things that you can do, and that there are people who can you can talk to who will help you. So get in touch. Okay, everyone who is a part of this call, if there are specific areas that you need help with like this, we have people who can help and will help. So please do get in touch and we will do our best for you.
Thank you, sir. We have another response from the forum. What am I even going to do if I come across that man again? He's probably dead. That man was at least 60 when he did abuse me 15 years ago. It's an irrational but a constant fear that a victim lives with, thinking that your childhood abuser would suddenly show up in your life again. He can't really do anything to me now, not when I'm no longer a kid. Yet that unhealed, hopeless inner child shivers at the thought of meeting him again.
I can understand that. Again, um, so let's have a conversation. Let's talk about how we can value these feelings and still move on from them. Because it's not about hiding these feelings or burying these feelings. It is about valuing how you feel and taking a look at what happened and then identifying a way that we can move on from that and still have general good well-being around us. Okay. So get in touch again for this person too.
So those are all the questions we had from you. Thank you,
Yeah, so I mean
sir.
your questions and the experiences that the participants were so courageous in sharing just now, especially these last few. Um, First of all, I want to commend everyone who did share. Thank you for that. Thank you for letting us understand or helping us understand that this is our reality. This is our collective reality in Sri Lanka, sadly. However, there is hope and there are people who can help. So you don't have to think that you need to continue with this pain unabated for the rest of your life. Okay? And we can help you and we will find you the help you need. But thank you very much for the courage for coming forward and saying what you said or sharing what you had. Thank you.
Yes. And for the members of the audience who were putting these responses on the forum, I hope you guys will reach out to Mr. Hans from Grassrooted Trust and get the help or support that you need. And I'm very grateful that you guys were comfortable to share your stories in the forum. I would like to open the floor for any questions that the audience might have. If you don't feel comfortable unmuting yourself, you feel free to put it on the chat box. And in the meantime, please fill your attendance form in the link on the messages.
I also just
Hi,
put up the email ID that you need to contact if you need it. Okay?
hi.
Yes, sir.
I hope that I'm audible.
Yes, you
Yeah.
are.
Okay. Hi, sir. I'm Lehan Kongalage. I'm a final year law student. The last time
Okay.
I saw you was in 2019 during Raila. I was the
Okay.
one guy who said he wanted to be the president of the country. I don't know if you remember,
Did I
but
laugh?
yes, you did.
Well,
It's really nice to meet you.
do you still want to be the president, Leha?
Yes, I do want to get involved in politics, but there are certain individuals in my life who are, kind of against the idea of Sri Lankan politics because it's a bit dangerous out there. Um, Metana Tinna, yeah.
Okay. Local politics is not a bad place to start, Lehan, because I think I'm a firm believer in local politics, municipal government.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
that's not a bad place to begin. And hopefully, by the time you're of age to take leadership, there won't be an executive presidency in our country. Let's hope.
No, I mean, there have been talks about it, right?
Yeah.
So, first and foremost, I love the earrings. Uh, Secondly,
Okay.
sir, since I am a final year law student as well, and I'm starting my attorneys pretty soon, I wanted to
Yeah.
ask if you have any volunteer opportunities because this entire audience are undergraduates from different avenues in academics. I
So
wanted
there
to
are,
ask on,
yeah, yeah. So there
hmm,
are
I
absolute
wanted,
volunteer opportunities. But the point
okay,
is
sir.
that your volunteer opportunity will be constructed around you sending us a CV. So anyone here who wants to volunteer, you need to send us a CV so that we can identify what your skill set is. And then once we identify your skill set, then we can involve you. Now, around bakamuno.lk, what we're looking for right now is people that can package our information in more creative ways and get it out to your peers. So memes, cartoons, art, anything, you know what I mean? How we can talk about
Yeah,
serious things like we have in these creative ways. But Lehan, if you're a law student, there are also research opportunities with us, all sorts of stuff that you can do. Now, there is one caveat, however, for working within a physical space. If you're working with us within physical space, you need to visit us here in Ibbagamo, which is north of Kurunagala on the Dambula Road, right? So that is the
yes.
physical space within which we work. But there is also
Okay.
ample opportunity for the online space where you can sit where you are and create and generate content for us. Okay.
Okay, sir. I would love to. So I will be sending in my CV. It should be sent to the same email address that you put
Same
in
one,
the
trust
chat
at
here.
grassrooted.net. Send in your CV. Whoever is interested, send in a CV. And I'll also make sure that we send a flyer that can go around and you can send that around too. Okay?
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Nimna.
Thank you, Rehan. Is there any more questions? Yes, we have a question from the chat. Why has Sri Lanka normalized rape to the point where they will blame the victim with the most absurd excuses for rape?
Because of the patriarchy is unfortunately the answer. Because within this patriarchal context, the man is the entitled one and the man is the one in charge. And if the man is the one in charge, then why would the man take the blame? So it is the woman who is to blame. And you will have, like I said, ridiculous things like the man cannot control himself. The mind is the sexual organ. If you want a sexual organ, there is only one sexual organ, it is the mind. There is no involuntary message that our penis gets to get erect. The mind plays a crucial role, especially in sexual violence also. So excuses are all they are, and the reason for the excuse is because of the patriarchal construct within which we operate. Sadly, that is the reality for most uh, countries in the world, not just Sri Lanka.
Thank you, sir. Is there any more questions?
If there's anything we can help with, um, feel free to get in touch. So Nimna will call it, no?
Yes. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this session. Mr. Hans, thank you very much for joining and enlightening us about sexual and gender based violence. I believe that you have not only given us insight about this topic, but also help us to take a step into advocating the survivors and also educating ourselves and equipping ourselves with the knowledge and the insight that are needed to prevent sexual and gender based violence. Um, and I would also like to thank the audience for joining in today. Without you guys joining, this event would not be a success. And also, last but not least, I have to express my gratitude towards the Royal Institute's RACRIC Club for making this project happen. Thank you, everyone, for joining in today.
Right. Thank you. And I look forward to receiving some CVs in my inbox. Take it easy, guys. Thank you, Nimna. That was very well done.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Guys,
Bye-bye.
before everyone leaves, Mr. Hans has shared with us a flyer for volunteer opportunities, and we will be sharing a post with that flyer if anyone wants to look out for that. Thank you.